Hello everyone and welcome to this week's episode of SUGTalks. I'm Craig Dale, your host, and together with our special guests, we'll take a deep dive into the topics, challenges and opportunities facing SAP users today. Please make sure you subscribe so you never miss another episode. I'm delighted today to be joined by Bert Schulze, S4HANA Product Success, Co-Innovation and Adoptions Programs Vice President at SAP, and Leighton Joskey, the Head of SAP and Finance Systems at the University of Warwick. So, welcome to you both. So,
Thanks for having us.
Wonderful. Before we start the conversation, I, for one, have enjoyed watching the Olympics and the Paralympics over the summer, which kind of got me thinking about a chosen or favourite Olympic event. So if you had to choose an Olympic event to participate in, what would it be and why? And I'd like to start with you, Leighton. I do apologise.
Gosh, I think I'd probably have to go with table tennis, as it's the only sport I've ever been even remotely any good at. Really quite shocking in every other aspect of sport. But yeah, when I was younger, I used to play a bit of table tennis. Although to say I was successful in it's probably over-egging my capabilities somewhat. At a very low level, in a very small village league, I wasn't too bad.
Oh, thank you. So they're not jumping into the crowd and clipping the ball back over down the aisle?
No, just about getting it back over the net would keep me happy.
Oh, well, that's a success in its own right. And Bert?
Well, actually, I would go into the pool, to be honest. So I used to swim a lot in the past, and 100 meter and 200 meter freestyle is definitely my favorite in that overall setup if I would have to participate somewhere.
Oh, wow. Oh, well, very good. So there you go, straight in, like a fish to water, so to speak. Or is it a duck to water? I can't remember the exact saying. Oh, mine would probably be, well, I used to do the high jump at school, and I was okay at that. But I think I like cycling a bit now, although I wouldn't be able to compete, just don't mind riding a bike. So anyway, thank you very much for that, gentlemen. And back to the matter at hand. So for this episode, we're looking at making the business case to move to S4HANA. And in previous episodes, we've looked at how organizations can successfully navigate moving to S4. And today we want to take a look at a bit closer of how organizations can make the business case for moving in the first place. So while figures show that S4HANA adoption is on the rise, we still hear from many members that making the business case can be a challenge. You know, some would even cite that, you know, they have ECC6, it works for them and it works for their business. So if it isn't broke, why fix it? So to start things off, Bert, it would be great if you could if I could get your take really on why organizations should move to S4HANA.
That's a great question. And in my eyes, the reason lies pretty much in the volatile market perspective. Let's maybe dig into that for a second. If we put aside all the extraordinary situations which we currently experience outside, the customer expectations are everything but just not the normal. And the bar is really raised super high for services to also meet customer expectations on a much higher level than ever before. And what we've seen that this also have a significant impact on organizations and on enterprises. So moving from mass production to mass customization, moving from products to services, moving from buying items to using items, moving from reactive processes and systems to thinking processes and systems, and finally also from needs to experiences. And it is pretty easy for most of the companies to really put a promise at the storefront saying customer is king. The challenging part is to really keep that promise. And this is something where we currently see also that the digital transformation and the transformed economy as such are really putting a lot of customers under stress. And from an ERP or enterprise perspective, it's simply lifting the volume of transactions simply to an unexpected height. Let me give you a very concrete example of what I'm talking about. In a traditional business, one invoice might represent for a company 1 million euro of revenue. In a subscription economy, after the transformation, it is 1 million invoices with €1 each to reach the same amount of revenue. And now keep the enterprise compliant and data integer on the same level as before, which means you need accounts receivable, accounts payable, goods received, invoice received, so the entire GRIR process. Think of dunning runs. So simply said, if you touch a €1 invoice only once through the life cycle of flow through an enterprise system, you're already burning your company's money. And the same happens in logistics. So think of like the approach driven by the segment of one. Think of similar to invoices, order quantity, which is these days also more one piece than the huge bulk procedures which we've seen in the past, which is a segment of serving a customer like an individual rather than a large group of customers. And again, here you need your MRP, you need your so the material requirements planning, you need your production order to be managed, you need your delivery nodes to be managed, and all that on a level which have not been experienced by customers in the past. And this is where we do see that when we started developing S/4HANA, it was exactly designed to be the digital core for our customers to meet the grown expectations in a digitally transformed economy, to run all of that on that high level at scale.
Thank you. And, what is the, if we look at return on investment on S4HANA, what is the ROI model for making the business case for moving to S4? Is there an average return investment figure that we can provide?
This is pretty much depending on companies, depending on the strategy and vision of different companies. I would not say this is a one-size-fits-all approach, but what we've done, to just give you one example, from the 10,000 customers which we have live already, we have from a significant amount of these customers data, which we've also put into our value calculator. So there's a dedicated webpage which also SAP provides, impact.s4value.com. And here we have, based on industries which you can use as a selection, or based on line of business approaches, we also see that we have created a lot of examples based on real customer data where we, for example, could see the impact on the business side. Let's say days sales outstanding as typical business KPIs in contrast to any kind of IT KPI. And we do see that you can benchmark your current system, but also your potential future system against these kind of figures, and see what is the average, for example, a company has achieved when they move to S4.
Oh, interesting. And that was s4value.com, did you say that?
It's impact.s4value.com. And it's just one example. I think we have in the meantime also a landing page with more sources of information. It's really a question of where customers are at that stage when they start building their use case. Because I think we have a fundamental bigger problem also if we look into when these kind of business cases are starting to be designed. My experience, and I can just share what I did with my group. So as you rightfully said in the beginning, I'm running all S4HANA adoption programs from product engineering. I do that for our S4HANA cloud solution, as well as for our S4HANA, let's say, on-prem and private cloud edition solution. And we're advising customers with my group on implementations, making sure that we have a proper roll in and roll out of all of the information which we have available centrally. Now, I've touched with my team round about 1,000 implementations so far as an advisor group, rather as a greenfield or brownfield implementation. And what we do see is that a lot of customers still run their implementations in both directions, brownfield or greenfield, as an IT project. So they do not properly look at the business case creation in the first place, but consider that they run the upgrade similar to how an upgrade was run in the old ECC world from Enhancement Pack 4 to Enhancement Pack 5 as one example. Because it's pretty easy to fund it like that. And we also do see that then also the expectations are not to go to the business and renew the handshake of the business blueprint, because you can just consider that the business blueprint, which you've done in the past, still holds true, which also accelerates some of the implementations. But on the other side, of course, customers get just out of it what they get put into it, which means like for like. If you just transport and transform your systems into an S4 system, you're not really leveraging the opportunities which you have inside an S4 system.
Okay, thank you. And Leighton, if I may just ask you, how much does what Bert's took us through there align with Warwick University's reasons for moving?
Well, we started thinking about moving about 4 or 5 years ago. We have been running SAP for about 20 years now, and so there was little desire to consider moving to alternative software, but we were aware that changes coming down the pipe in terms of supportability and the long-term future of the version that we were on SAP were changing. So there was a sort of an external imperative that if we were to maintain our desire to be on a supported version, on a contemporary version, we would have to think about moving forwards. We were also aware of other benefits that S4 could bring us. And so when we were constructing the business case, or the business benefits in our PID, our project initiation document for the project, it was very much a twin track of, we need to make this move. We don't believe we've got the resources to do it in a greenfield style, but to brownfield it would be a shame to miss out on the opportunities that could afford. So what we were trying to do was to say, okay, so how do we implement this in a way that will enable us to pick up as many of those benefits along the way, or reset us in a new direction, so that when we have done our upgrade, we have reconfigured the way we approach thinking about SAP to make it easier to increase our adoption. And I think Bert talked about the handshake with the business. So we, alongside the technical aspects of doing it, we also tried to build a framework of business process master lists, business process owners. So whilst they weren't being asked to fundamentally redesign the way that their business processes were realized in SAP, they weren't being asked to convert everything into the world of Fiori. They were brought along with this transformation so that they understand this new role in our organization, the business process owner. They understand what we're talking about when we're talking about business process master lists, so that when we transition post our upgrade to S4, that we can move forwards with implementing business process re-engineering or SAP S4 best practice in a very different way, in a much more structured way. And whilst that perhaps misses a trick from the day one sort of go live, I think in terms of manageability and de-risking the scale of the project, that was where we found the sweet spot for our business case. It made sense for us. And of course, as a university, some of our imperatives are slightly different to commercial organizations.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, I hope you're enjoying this episode of SUGTalks. I just wanted to take a moment to tell you that our UKI SUG Connect conference is back. Join us as we present Vision 2021, planning for the future at the ICC in Birmingham from the 28th to the 30th of November. With keynotes, 12 breakout streams, over 70 exhibitors and networking events, all aimed at driving success for the SAP community, make sure you attend the premier SAP-related event in the UK and Ireland. We're going above and beyond government and public health guidance to ensure the event is delivered in a safe and secure environment for you. We look forward to welcoming you back to Birmingham, where we can all learn and develop together. To learn more, visit sapusers.org/connect.
And, one of the things we often hear from members, I alluded to earlier, is one of the difficulties of them justifying the move to S4, especially to senior business stakeholders, is that they already have the functionality as part of ECC6, and moving to S4 is an additional cost. And in some instances, functionality is less complete, perhaps, than what organisations have today. So Bert, how would you respond to that side?
Yeah, this is something which we have heard with some of the initial versions. So going back, you know that we're currently in the 7th year of innovations with S4HANA. So we shipped the first version was 15.11, and at that point in time, I think there have been a lot of truth in what you just said. But delivering more and more functionality over time, and especially also investing significantly in changing the fundamental underlying processes, have been what customers appreciated most, and where they also have built a lot of business cases around. So of course, if I consider that I also had an ECC and MRP process and material requirements planning process, but it took, unfortunately, for some customers with super long and strong and large BOMs up to sometimes 18 hours to really run a material requirements planning. What we've seen is that we have in the meantime in S4, to just give you one example, we had with 1610 the first MRP update, which I would call MRP 1.0. So we significantly adjusted the process, which led to a situation that a customer, and we had a reference and co-innovation customer I worked with here in Germany, which is just 20 kilometers away from Walldorf, a large truck manufacturer, and they moved their MRP from 20 hours to round about 20 minutes. And consider what this means for your entire subsequent enterprise planning processes. If you can do your entire sales planning not as before once a week, because you have to run your MRP over the weekend, and then Monday morning the first thing you're doing is to print out the result of the MRP run and use it as a static information for the rest of the week. But you could do, based on the achievements which we had within the system, also complete new planning, which you can do almost daily, or twice or 3 or 4 times a day. And changing this kind of processes is something which of course creates a significant amount of value for companies, but it is pretty hard to analyze that prior the implementation and then consider what is the value I give to that process if you can run it like 10, 100 or even 1,000 times faster in that overall setup. And this is where most of the business cases are struggling, where customers have a very positive setting and understanding about business process adjustment is if you look into automation, where we've seen, for example, that if you run a normal order process through the organization and now make that an intelligent order process, which leads, for example, to the situation I made at the beginning with the invoice, that I do not touch my normal standard core ERP business processes anymore at all. And consider that the business user is only focusing on exception-based handling, and I can completely focus people on these activities, on the exception-based, because the Fiori setup is also bringing this information not in a transactional way as in the past, but really as a call-to-action approach to the end user, which gives them the opportunity, again going back to my MRP example, instead of chasing the work is chasing the people, because the MRP planner gets an alert, a real-time alert inside the system. Here is a process which requires action from your side. And this is the fundamental shift in making sure that we prepare companies, enterprises for the digitally transformed economy. For automation, it is easier to create the business case. For fundamental reshape, change, or reorganization of business processes, it's sometimes a bit more difficult because it's hard to anticipate what is really the impact at the end of the day.
Thank you. And Leighton, did you receive, obviously you were moving for for different reasons, I suppose. But did you receive any pushback or any specific challenges when making your business case at Warwick?
Well, it's always, I think, as Bert's described, it's really hard to put numbers on it, particularly if you're extolling the virtues of S4 in terms of simplifying interactions that people will have with SAP, simplifying business processes, having a user interface that will have, among other things, less clicks, or it will chain together transactions and make it feel like you're not doing a transaction. It makes it feel like you're doing a business process. All of those things, the consequences of them are not very predictable, or at least not very convincing when you try and spin that story together. It could be as you've defined, but when you start putting numbers on it, when you start putting like minutes and hours and whatnot, it starts to get quite tenuous quite quickly. So we were trying to paint more of a picture of the longer term opportunity that this afforded us. It's almost like trying to say that the ship hasn't got any further to sail in the ocean with our old version. It's still there, it's still afloat, it's not going to do anything wrong, but we can do so much more with our new version. And by trying to describe all of the things that can be a consequence of what we were doing with S4, we could start to paint a much more interesting and valuable picture in our business case. And it's not just about specific technologies that S4 opened the door to, automation, for example, or streamlined business processes, but it was all of the other elements that came with it that we could implement during our upgrade process in terms of moving to a more agile mindset, which is relatively straightforward with an S4 implementation. My team probably won't thank me for saying that because they've worked very hard at doing this, but it lends itself to it. A lot of the help that you can get in terms of the collateral that SAP partners provide makes sense with an agile mindset. There are other tools that we've brought on, a testing system or cut and slice system for our data. It's just it's not just the business best practice, but it's the technical best practice that we've been able to go back and say, yeah, okay, so day one, we're going to feel really fighting fit. And that is important because that is then going to enable us to be in a position of saying, okay, so now here's the opportunity. Because if we hadn't done all of those things, I think we would end up saying, oh gosh, we've just implemented S4, we've done a technical a technical upgrade, and we're now exhausted and we've not prepared ourselves for implementing Fiori redesign or whatever it might be, automation, or talking to business process owners about the business process master list, or bringing in new areas of SAP that we previously hadn't done. And I think that is a difficult thing to put a price on, but you can actually look back at the challenges that you've had with SAP related projects, the lessons learned from the projects, and say, actually, we've got a direct path to making that better. And some of those things can be costed. When you look back and go, oh, we had a project failure or a project overrun, that should be less likely in the future, given S4, given our sort of improvements in the way that we're ready for change.
Oh,
That's
thank you.
Amazing topic. Maybe if I'm allowed to, because Leighton said something, at least this is what I also understood between the lines, Leighton, that quick wins is also something which you really appreciate in that overall setup, right? Especially if you look into the Fiori setting. And this is something which we also recognized across most of our customers. And in the meantime, you find in our Readiness Check, which is like a common tool if you do a system conversion, we have a section in that readiness tool which is called Recommended SAP Fiori Apps. So what this section is doing, it is analyzing the business processes and transactions of the analyzed system, so of the source system. And then it's building recommendations for SAP Fiori Lighthouse apps which offer an immediate business benefit with simplifications and also efficiency increase for tasks which are typically running also at high volume in that source system. This is something I can very strongly recommend. I think we have also seen that a lot, that customers who went through a system conversion, so did a brownfield implementation, which is, by the way, today you can say rough and tough, 50% of customers decide for a greenfield and 50% decide for brownfield implementation or conversion in that case. And this is a very important and powerful tool also to look into. And by the way, there's also another section where you can get so-called business case story cards. This is a section which tries to unlock the innovation potential as part of the readiness check. It's a section in that tooling, and also here you get, via these business card stories, you get recommendations where innovation potential is for your dedicated business, for your dedicated system, based on the quantitative and qualitative usage of the existing source system.
I would definitely emphasize the readiness check as a thing you can do, you should do, to help you build your business case. It gives you so much information for a relatively low investment of time and resources to understand where you need to be, but not only where you need to be in order to go forwards with an S4 project, but also what that S4 project could deliver for you. There's huge amounts of information. I think anybody thinking about S4 should definitely try and get on with that as a matter of course, as quickly as possible.
Yeah. That's also always my recommendation. You can do that at any time. So even if you consider your transformation is maybe a year out or 2 years out, there's a strong recommendation to instantly start with the readiness check, because what we also embedded in the meantime, which we also didn't have in earlier releases, is our code analyzer. There's a custom code analyzer section, which also gives you the opportunity to directly analyze your existing custom code, because this has been in the past often also argumentation from customers why they can't move to S4, because there's so much custom code in the ECC environment which needs to be proved against the system. And this is what now the tool is doing for customers, to analyze it and also come back with clear recommendations of applications which are running without any problem in the new environment, application areas where we recommend to also do some adjustments, because you might have code which you designed for yourself, which is not optimized for HANA. So we also have experienced that some of the custom code elements in the past have been slower in an S4 system than before, which is simply due to the fact that HANA somehow operates differently. And we also do a clear recommendation which part of the code should potentially move into an BTP environment, so in business into the platform, and move outside of our S4 system. Because what we all want to avoid is that you do once a transition or move into S4, and then in 2 years you're sitting again in front of a back to standard project, because you've taken too much over which you might not need. And statistically, I can also definitely share with you that round about 55% of all custom code which exists in an ECC system today is not required in a new S4HANA environment any longer. And the reasons are also there are a couple of reasons behind it. Main reason is that customers have built functionality at an earlier point in time, which is in the meantime replaced by standard functionality. And the second biggest reason is that, all our enterprises are living organisms, and a lot of custom code are workarounds around static aggregates. And in an S4 environment, we don't have static aggregates anymore, because we're always doing a calculation based on line item structure in that HANA setup. And this is something which is really an amazing setup. And we have, by the way, seen a couple of customers who've built their entire business case only around removing custom code. Because if we look into super large system, we see some with up to 40, 50,000 custom code objects. And if you can get rid of 55%, in some customers even up to 80% of their custom code, this is a significant cost factor which you can sometimes even leverage to pay the entire case for an S4 implementation.
Wow. Thank you both there, and some very, very interesting insights into that. And just going back to what you said earlier, Leighton, about your move and business case for S4, and a lot of it being, initially thinking about being on a supported version of SAP along into the future. Now, obviously, the maintenance deadline for Business Suite 7 will influence other customers as to when they move to S4. And what are the financial considerations for organisation here? I mean, what were the implications and considerations for you at Warwick University, Leighton?
Gosh, so I suppose it wasn't immediately coming from a financial place, but more from a strategy of maintaining being on a supported environment, and I suppose a slightly less well-defined strategy of being on a contemporary environment. So we had in the past on occasions got a little bit behind, and of course as soon as you get a little bit behind, the technical debt means that it can be quite hard to catch up, and we'd found ourselves in a place where we didn't want to keep doing that. I think we were also aware that because there was a fixed point for the transition to S4, there was going to be challenges with resourcing for making that move. There's going to be a fixed number of skills in the market to help you do it with partners. There's a lot of things to learn for the team, which what we really ended up doing was trying to get the team to do as much of that technical transition as possible, with a bit of outsourcing of support as and when we needed it. But predominantly it's the team finding their own way to try and learn how to support, how to move forwards with S4 into the future, which has been very successful. But obviously we were aware that can take time. We didn't want to go down to the wire, because if we went down to the wire in terms of that support window, we imagine that the cost would only ever go up in terms of supply and demand. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Leighton. And Bert, what from from your perspective to customers, are the financial considerations they need to be thinking about now in the lead up to that deadline?
Yeah, I think I would just chime into what Leighton said. We see a lot of customers who've waited. On the other side, we do see that we have 10K customers live, right? And we are close to 11K customers very soon who are live on S4. So we can definitely consider that we're not talking about a fresh product in the market anymore. So it's pretty mature. It is leveraged by customers across all industries. And we also do see, of course, that even our large SI organizations outside in our ecosystem all have, in the meantime, S4 practices. So from that perspective, I think this is a balanced approach, but we've seen that also with the move of the maintenance window, we've seen that more customers also started to relax a bit back, which was not the intention of that decision, because we wanted to just give customers more time, especially the large ones, to also consider their move properly with all their environments. And waiting too long exactly hits on what Leighton said before, right? It just brings more customers towards with the back to the wall at a certain point in time, and maybe increase the price for a transition.
Okay, thank you. And when we're looking at experience and advice, I suppose, that you both have for organisations looking to build their business case to S4. If I start with you again, Leighton, we've mentioned Readiness Check already, and then Bert went on to talk about Code Analyzer and how the reduction of custom code can have huge impacts on organisations. But based on your experience, Leighton, what other advice would you give to organisations looking to build their business case to move to S4?
Gosh, so I suppose the way I approached it, which I think resonated with my colleagues, was to try and avoid thinking of the project as a single point in time, it's done and it's complete. So obviously there are things that you have to do to move to S4, but actually S4, like SAP, it's a platform that will continue to evolve. And so if you want to be able to jump into this new sort of the new fast lane of SAP into the future, into the next 10 years, into the next 20 years, you've got to make that jump. And so I think it's helpful to think about not just how do you get to day zero, but what will day zero give you further down the line, so that your benefits are both the cost of the project that you're trying to offset, but also much more future benefits in terms of maybe you want to enable future projects for automation. Maybe you want to enable future projects for business process engineering. You don't necessarily have to say that your transformation project will do all of that in one step. And what that then gives you is perhaps a more manageable set of costs to think about in terms of how do you get to that first stage, and people being a bit more prepared to talk about a range of benefits rather than a specific cost figure. If you're talking about, once we've got to S4, we can then think about automation and the sorts of things, the sorts of benefits that automation can bring are. And you can use those examples that SAP or other people have got in terms of what they have achieved, but you're not necessarily tying your business case to that for the upgrade project. I think where we came in earlier, it's very hard to say this is exactly the consequence of what these changes will bring to you. Perhaps automation is probably not the best example, because that is the one that you can probably put a metric to in terms of how long it takes to process an invoice or whatever. But I think it still holds true that it's such a huge, significant business change. You're talking in ifs, buts and maybes, whereas if you bring it back, you've got a maintenance issue, you've got a supportability issue, you've got opportunities that you can then bring forwards. I suppose it's a long-winded way of me saying I think business cases need to tell the story of what the point is. If your business case is just pounds, I think you're missing out on a huge opportunity of what this kind of change can give you into the future. Like I say, it's all about selling that journey rather than the end point of upgrading that day. So I was a bit woolly, I think. I'm not quite sure that answers what you wanted, Craig.
Thank you. I think, that I do like that, building that picture and that story for the business of the future and where you're going. And it's not always about pounds and pence. You're quite right there. And Bert, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, couple of aspects. So, I said initially that we see a lot of companies running projects like an IT project, like in the past. And this has, in my eyes, two consequences. And by the way, the reason for that is also obvious, because who is the owner of an ERP system in a company? Who is really the owner? This is a challenge which we've seen. In the past, I would have said it is the IT, the CIO. Now going forward, it is in many cases often or more often the CFO, but it's really, you rarely find a clear ownership for an ERP system in that setup. And the consequences of running it as an IT project is pretty wide. Spendings immediately become costs, because it's not an investment into the company's future, it is just costs, and costs follow a different approach. Cost requires to be optimized and reduced. I always talk about the efficiency goals, right, or efficiency gains in that setup, while investments into the future are typically effectiveness increases and follow a complete different approach. And this is something which we always need to take into consideration when we look at these elements. And the second aspect is that if you run an IT project, companies prefer to run in brownfield because, as I said before, there's no additional handshake required. So what does it mean in a concrete recommendation to where would I start and do we recommend to customers where to start? I absolutely recommend and advise to any customer, consider running a discovery phase. In the discovery phase, you can also make up all your minds about, for example, what deployments of S4 would be meaningful for you as a company. Would you want to go into a public cloud environment? Would you want to go into a private cloud environment? Are you ready to also consume upgrades in a different way? Are you ready to do more standard in that setup? Which is a good starting point for an interesting discussion in that setup. And also how much you are willing as an organization and able to really adopt change in that overall setup. And then we have, as said before, a couple of tools which we provide during this discovery phase for customers, starting with the value advisor, so the business value advisor service, which I just recommended to you also initially with this URL. And we also offer experience trial systems to really prepare companies for a fresh start in that setup. And this really also allows to test out the business configuration in a suitable setup for SAP standard content, because we also, and this is another interesting aspect, we consider that if we compare companies who are net new to SAP and doing a greenfield implementation of S4HANA versus those customers who come from an ECC environment but decided to also do a greenfield fresh implementation, believe it or not, but net new customers to SAP have an on average 3 months faster implementation. And it's simply because they consider standard tools which are brought in from SAP, like our best practices, like our EML, our enterprise management layer, as the foundational jumpstart into a project is leveraged, because they simply say, oh, it's there, then I'm going to leverage it. It's why we do see that existing customers often have the let's say the backpack from past experience, and they just always go back to their original blueprint and consider, oh, this is how I did it like 20 years ago. Would I really want to move away from that? And this, of course, sometimes even hinders companies in adopting faster in that overall setup. But the entire package of a discovery phase, as said, with the value advisor, with the experience trial, including the readiness check and some other tools we're providing there, is a nice overall package which gives a good indication where will be short wins or quick wins available in a fresh S4 environment.
Thank you. Thank you both for sharing those insights. And just we're kind of running right over time at the moment, and I just wanted to come to one final question, if I may. And that is, Bert, what role can SAP and partners play in helping organizations make their business case? What should customers be looking to extract from SAP and partners in what support, I suppose, in building their case?
That's an interesting question. So, of course, as I'm part of product management engineering, of course, we're trying to make sure that we deliver more functionality on a frequent basis to make sure that we also attract more customers, especially these AI technologies. But for me personally, as I'm running our customer care and RIC programs, which are our main adoption programs, of course, we are trying to make sure that we bring as many new references and examples to the table, and also publish these references and examples. Then, similar to what Leighton laid out before, it is important to also share the experience from customers, to also see, is there another one in my industry who already made the case and has a positive story to talk about. So this is definitely something which we also always try to bring in. And as said, with the impact.s4value.com, you can really choose from your industry LOB interest, benchmark achievements against industry average, against other companies, but also against your former system. This is something which is really helping to generate awareness and also create trust and faith for customers that this is the right path to go. And the same for partners, right? We always ask partners to also bring their examples and references to the table. this is, in my eyes, in a nutshell, where we do see where we can create.
Thank you. Bert. And Leighton, did you speak to SAP or your partner in the run-up to your business case?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think the tools that were around from SAP, for example, were a little different 4 years ago, but they're essentially all to the same ambition of laying out what opportunities, what changes, what tools are available. The Readiness Check, again, I'd just reiterate, just get on and run that and look to SAP sort of, or your partners, to sort of steer you in the right direction if you need that. I think just the collateral that helps you understand what it's going to feel like running SAP, and in this new version, some things work just exactly the same. It still does what SAP does, but if you can try and extract that sense of new, and understand what that could mean in terms of how you as a technical team can operate and how you as a business can operate, I think that's what lets you paint that picture. Some business cases will always need to translate that into a return on investment, etc. But I think when Bert started talking about see it as a longer term future investment rather than just an IT sunk cost, I think will make your business case much more effective.
Thank you. Thank you both very much. And just to go back on a point you made there, Bert, about customer cases, and for our listeners, that's where your UK and Ireland SAP user group can come in very, very handy. We have our S4HANA Special Interest Group meeting coming up soon, and we have a dedicated S4HANA stream at our annual conference at the end of November, UK Connect, where we do showcase and we will have customers talking about their journey to S4. So if you're thinking about that and it's really time to make your move, come along, listen to what other customers have done. And really, thank you both very, very much, Bert, Leighton, for your time, insights on this recording. Really enjoyed the conversation. And to our listeners, thank you very much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the conversation and found it valuable. There are a few things in there that you perhaps should go and check. I think impact.s4value.com. Have a look at the Readiness Check. Think about the code analyzer. Think about coming along to the user group events focused on S4HANA. So until the next time, stay safe, stay well, and keep washing your hands.